A while ago, I made a video called 5 Reasons Why Pro-Choicers Suck. Well, that video might become illegal in the failed state of France if the far left gets its way and passes the latest incarnation of leftist lunacy through the Senate. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. The left is always, and I mean always without exception, the side that is constantly looking for new excuses to restrict speech. Whether it's for the good of the party or for protecting the feelings, censorship upon the free expression of ideas is part and parcel of being a leftist. So it is thus no surprise that France's Socialist Party, having realized that it will no longer be in power for the next year, is trying one last time to infringe upon Frenchmen freedom of expression before it leaves office. This time they're using the fake news excuse just like their American counterparts. So, coming from The Veg, France moves to ban misleading anti-abortion websites. And goes like this, quote, "The French National Assembly this week moved to criminalize websites that spread misinformation about abortions and spread pro-life propaganda. The law, approved on Thursday, would punish offenders with up to 2 years in prison and a €30,000 fine. It will now move on to the Senate, The Guardian reports. Supporters say the bill would target sites that masquerade as neutral sources of information on abortion, but are in fact operated by advocacy groups that seek to manipulate and pressure women into not terminating pregnancies." Can you imagine the crime? The proposal has drawn criticism from right-wing politicians and Catholic organizations who say it infringes upon free speech. A law passed in 1993 makes it a crime to intimidate or pressure women into not having abortions. The law was originally passed to prevent anti-abortion activists from blocking access to abortion clinics following a wave of demonstrations during the 1980s. The proposal passed in the lower house this week would extend that law to websites that, quote, "exert psychological or moral pressure," end quote, on women who are seeking information about abortions. 30 years ago, militants chained themselves to abortion clinics, Laurence Rossignol, the Socialist family minister, said during the debate this week. Today, their successors are continuing this fight on the web. Rossignol has identified several sites such as ivg.net, sosgrossesse.net and sosbebe.org as examples of misleading and manipulative platforms that seek to shame women into not terminating pregnancies. IVG.net portrays itself as a neutral platform to help women decide whether to have an abortion or not, promising complete information and offering a free helpline number. But as Le Monde reports, the site emphasizes the negative psychological and physical impacts that abortions can have on women and prominently features harrowing testimonies. Yeah, well, none of that is false though. I mean, abortion, like any other procedure, is not consequence-free. Anyway, back to the article. IVG.net also is the first result on Google France searches for IVG, which is the French acronym for abortions, ahead of the Health Ministry's official site for information. The proposed law has drawn criticism from conservative politicians and Catholic groups who see it as a violation of free speech. Last week, Catholic Archbishop Georges Pontier published a letter to President François Hollande in which he said that the bill questions the foundations of our freedoms and especially the freedom of expression. Bruno Retailleau, a senator from the center-right Republican Party, said the bill would limit the information about alternatives to abortion. But Rossignol contested those arguments during debate this week, saying, quote, "Freedom of expression should not be confused with manipulating minds." The Senate will open debate on the bill on December the 7th. Now, notice this intentional twisting of words. freedom of expression should not be confused with manipulating minds. Oh really? By that standard, the left should never, ever, under any circumstances, be even allowed to exist. Now, I suspect leftists wouldn't be so happy if their standard would be applied to them, wouldn't they? Laurence Rossignol is intentionally conflating persuasion with manipulation. And this is very typical of the extreme left, which tends to believe that nobody can legitimately be persuaded to hold a different point of view than the one held by the furthest, darkest corners of the far left, unless one has been manipulated into holding that point of view. Now, in Rossignol's mind, and everyone else's mind who is on the far left, nobody can or indeed should even attempt to read about the negative effects of abortion. The far left genuinely believes that abortion is a free-for-all human right that is so important that even freedom of expression must cede ground in front of this all-encompassing human right. And any other position other than the one that I just expressed is basically heresy. And that's why I routinely call the left a religion, because that is exactly what the left is. Now, what I find particularly fascinating is the left's obsession with this rather obscure topic in the French society. Now, we all know that the left is obsessed with murder, which is natural for any murderous cult, but it is rather peculiar for the left to become interested in this issue at this moment in time, when there are other, far more contentious issues to be settled. This could be the case for one of the two reasons. Either the left is pushing this as a building block to a far more encompassing censorship bill that they will come up with at a later date, or the fine men and women who run websites trying to lower France's abortion rate are starting to have, well, tangible results. Now, I was unable to find recent numbers to test the second hypothesis, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised to learn that this is indeed the case. After all, women are far more likely to be pro-life than men, which means that many of the pro-choice women are actually a lot less firm in their position than the left would have you believe, in which case a persuasive and strong enough case can actually sway opinions. Now, this would make sense, actually, given that the left is increasingly aware that its moral case for its policies is, well, increasingly unpopular, especially on social issues and especially in France. Now, it would make sense for the non-leftist case on the issue of abortion to gain ground in France as a result of grassroots, peer-to-peer persuasion efforts. In any event, the very idea that the state can basically pass a law and thus establish what's true and what is not true is, and indeed should be, appalling and unacceptable to anyone with two brain cells to rub together. But perhaps one of the reasons this isn't considered so is because France has no recent history of legit totalitarianism with state truths to remember and appeal to. The Nazi occupation was short-lived and anyway happened way too long ago. Not to mention, it wasn't overcome by a bottom-up effort of dissent, so as a result, way too many people can afford the luxury of holding the utterly mistaken belief that totalitarianism is something that cannot happen to them. That the rise of an anti-liberty regime is either a thing of the past or something that can only happen to others, less enlightened peoples, and not to them. And more to the point, way too many people genuinely believe that the rise of a totalitarian regime can only come from the right, as if Bolshevism was, just a one-off. And no amount of evidence can persuade those kinds of people, just like no amount of evidence can persuade a Muslim that Muhammad wasn't really a perfect man. Because just like Islam, leftism is a religion. Now, I've had discussions with a few academics roughly a year ago who insisted that such thing as far-left totalitarianism doesn't exist. Or if it does, it only exists in theory, or at the best case scenario sometime back in history, but definitely not in practice or in present days. Needless to say the same people were sudden Fidel Castro fans and apologists when the Cuban dictator finally became a good communist at the end of the last month. Anyway, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Maybe this insanity doesn't go through the Senate. But if it does, it will be a huge blow for the freedom of expression in France. But you know what? Every crisis presents itself with an opportunity attached to it. Now I wonder what are the prices for hosting services in, I don't know, in Ukraine maybe these days? I'll definitely look it up, because one of the beauties of the internet is that nothing stops a French language website to continue to inform the public whilst being hosted in Ukraine, since we brought the example, or Serbia, or Romania, or you know, countries where the separation of government and the internet is, well, still a thing. And with that being said, thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.